Okay. Hello, thank you everyone for joining us today. From all of us here at the Lehman Program on Creativity Entrepreneurship, or LPCE, we are excited that you took time out of your day to attend. Now, before I officially introduce our guest speaker, I'd like to briefly overview our program. LPCE is based at the Office of Undergraduate Education and was developed by the late Harvard professor Robert Liu and funded by Harvard alumnus Jorge Paulo Lemann. Our program prepares students to take the lead in solving global challenges by fostering entrepreneurial thinking, and we do this by offering classes, providing student startups with funding, and hosting community events like the one you are currently attending now. In addition, we also include details of our raffle for attending later today. And for now, if your Zoom name is your nickname, please rename yourself to the first name and last name that you registered with on Eventbrite, so that we can keep track of attendance and ensure we have the correct contact for our raffle prize. Now, thank you for joining us today. And with that, I'd like to officially welcome and introduce our guest speaker. Marinel M. de Jesus Esquire is the founder of the award-winning travel media site Brown Yao Trekker, the mountain trekking social enterprise Equity Global Treks, and the human rights nonprofit organization, the Porter Voice Collective. Marinel is a former civil rights attorney in Washington, D.C., who practiced law for 15 years and discovered during that time her passion for mountain trekking. In 2017, she left her legal career and life in the US completely to pursue a life of a global mountain nomad. In 2016, she founded her social enterprise Peak Explorations and media site Brown Yao Trekker. Both entities aim to inspire others to trek mountain trails globally while creating workforce equity and inclusion of women and indigenous communities in the trekking tourism industry worldwide. In 2019, she launched the nonprofit organization, the Porter Voice Collective, which utilizes media to advocate for the rights of porters in the trekking industries of Peru, Nepal, and Tanzania, seeking to create workforce equity within the trekking tourism industry that would advance the workers' rights and indigenous rights of porters. Now, in this talk, she will share her journey as a social entrepreneur with a mission to create equity and inclusion in the outdoor and travel industries, and how her identity as an Asian American woman and immigrant intersects with her work in a manner that only advances her mission further. From this workshop, you'll gain insight into the current status of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the outdoor and travel industries, learn the ways you can be a strong and effective advocate for social change, and harness the powers of your lived experiences as they connect to your marginalized identities in order to transform yourself into a unique, powerful, and authentic social entrepreneur and change maker. And with that, please help me in giving a warm welcome to Marinel. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. So delighted to be with fellow entrepreneurs. So let me go ahead and just share my screen. Should be ready to go. Do you guys see the screen okay? Okay. So I wanted to start out by saying Happy Earth Day. I have a background of mountains behind me. It's the Sinai Trail in Egypt, which I just finished a few weeks ago. I wanted to just share my journey being a social entrepreneur in a world of the outdoors and travel industry. I want to start out actually by saying that as an entrepreneur, one of the biggest things I learned was that there's a lot of surprises along the way. And this topic that I'm sharing with you is one of those because I didn't expect to be dealing with this topic as a social entrepreneur directly. So the topic I'm going to cover is how to leverage your marginalized identities to advance your mission as a social entrepreneur. So I want to share with you first what Bronco Trekker and Equity Global Treks are about. And actually, Peak Explorations has been rebranded to Equity Global Treks in 2020 because I wanted to be more deliberate with my mission. And Bronco Trekker is a media site, as noted in the introduction. It's to elevate the stories of women and indigenous communities, but also in combination with Equity Global Treks, I have a specific mission as an entrepreneur when I started in 2016. It's to elevate the roles of status of women in indigenous communities in the travel and outdoor industries. And there are three pillars to what I do. One is women focus, which means I'm trying to create women leadership in the trekking industry. That would mean helping out women to become guides or porters or mountain expedition workers. The workforce equity part has to do with the porters. And when I say porters, think about the people who carry your bags when you trek on Inca Trail or Kilimanjaro or Nepal's Himalayas. Those are the people who we call porters who carry your bags to summit the mountains. So workforce equity, it has to do with human rights issues and labor rights on the mountain trails pertaining to the porters. And then the community-led part of it has to do with my mission to elevate the roles of indigenous folks in the trekking industry, whereby we want to create tourism initiatives led by them. And then in 2019, as noted, I did create the Porter Voice Collective. Just to briefly summarize what it's about, it's to support the work on workforce equity with the porters, to elevate their voices, to advocate for the human rights, and ultimately to create workforce equity tourism in the travel and outdoor industries worldwide. And as noted, we're using the media to educate tourists about the issues, so that our hope is that the tourists will become advocates for workforce equity for the porters on the trails. So, with that said, the mission is pretty lofty, to be honest. I think back then I was like, oh, this is a great mission. But one thing I soon find out, I needed to do a lot of research on the topic because I realized there wasn't a lot of research, even though there was academic, research done previously on the porters and some of the gender equity issues in the industry. But to me personally, I needed to be on the ground. And so in 2017, I became a full-time mountain nomad. And this is where the mountain nomad comes in, because in order to run my enterprise effectively, I felt it necessary to go travel to the places that I'm interested in terms of creating inclusion and equity. So I went to Peru and spent time there. And actually, I'm still here in Peru in the Andes Mountains. That's where I'm calling from the indigenous lands of the Quechua people. And these are the women from the Cusco region. I studied the industry in terms of the women's role and found out that mainly what they do in Cusco is to create textiles, to sell textiles. But when it comes to mountain trekking, for example, they're not even doing any kind of portering. I mean, only a few of them, less than 20 in 2019. So a lot of women are selling and making textiles as the way to make money. But most of the bulk of the roles are played by men. Which is really not a surprise. If you travel overseas, you'll probably notice it yourself that a lot of it is male dominated. So I also made friends with some of the porters and did some filmmaking on the ground in 2019. I did some research on the porter abuses and exploitation on Inca Trail. And this is one of the meetings they had. They have 8,000 porter members for the Federation, which is a member based porter led Federation on behalf of the porters. When I spoke with the president of the Federation asking if women are welcome in 2019, reluctantly, he did kind of say no to me. And it was kind of an interesting conversation because I'm a woman and I'm trying to help the porters deal with the human rights issues on the ground. But when it comes to talking about gender, it becomes an uncomfortable topic because I'm not getting any kind of support from them to agree to include women and their voices in this industry. So it's always an interesting place to be when it's a male dominated space. There are 8,000 Porter members, all of them are men. And when I tried to figure out how many women in 2019 were participating as porters, there were only about maybe 15 of them. But this is a recent phenomenon, just so you know. It just started 5 years ago. So that's why it's a small number of women. But I believe in the future it's going to increase some more because the women porters are realizing the value of working in the industry because it's a lot more money rather than doing agriculture or selling textiles. So this is Juana, for example, when we did some research on the ground, we were hiking the Inca Trail here in 2020, and she is one of the very few female porters out of the 8,000, or actually, yeah, on top of the 8,000 men. And then I went to Mongolia. So this is another part of the world where I spent time with the eagle hunters. This is the community of Kazakh nomads, and it's a Muslim community. And I wanted to understand again the role of the women. So Banu on the right side here, she is a guide. She does both mountain trekking and city guiding. She actually is an entrepreneur. So I was really surprised that in Mongolia, the women's roles are more advanced, which I was so happy to know. They can actually be leaders of their own companies and be the founders. So I was really impressed with how progressive it is in Mongolia. And then here, Almudir is a 10-year-old eagle huntress. And I have to tell you more about her because she's amazing when it comes to women empowerment. At the age of 10, she's already really creating inclusion in her own way. Um, but before I do that, let me talk about the women nomads first. So this is me when I was, on the ground. As you see, there are camels. There were a lot of more herds than this. We were doing a migration trip in this photo, and one thing I did was to investigate the status of women's role when it comes to migration, because the tourism industry has caught up with the idea that we can market migration tours for tourists, and migration is an ancient part of the nomadic culture where the families and their herds like camels, all the animals will walk for a few days to the next camp or to the next place where they can get pasture for their animals for feeding. And they do this in ancient times about 4 times or more a year. So but unfortunately this is a dying tradition. They now do it only once or twice a year. Some of them, they call themselves semi-nomadic at this point because they don't do it full time because of the modernity and the technology coming into the community. So I asked local operators if I want to do a migration tour, can they be led by women? And they flat out told me, no, that's not possible. We can't do that. It's all led by men. So I was really curious because what does that mean? Does that mean in ancient times only men were migrating? And so when I dug further into it, I spoke with some historians on the ground in Mongolia and learned that the women were actually the ancient leaders of migration. They were leading migrations in the past. They were able to pack camels. And that's a tough thing to do because I tried to do that. That's really a lot of work. But they were able to do it when we did the migration in 2020 with these women. They can herd animals, they can migrate for days, they can set up gur and yurts, and set up the camps and break it down. So the skills that are involved with migration, the women were able to do it. And the amazing thing is when we did the migration trip for like 5, 6 days, the women who participated in this program were very happy because they were telling us, I'm so happy we did this because we finally remembered our tradition. We were doing this as women back in the day. We just forgot how to pack camels. So I think this was a very big learning experience for me because I realized the reasons why there is inclusion in the industry, and there could be various factors. One can be, it's really cultural because they have gender roles from the very beginning in ancient times coming in from their culture. It can also be religion because I was told by the women and the historian that when Islam came to their community, the roles changed. They took a back seat to leading migration trips. They took a back seat in making decisions in the community, and they ended up being domesticated. So when you think about it, that connects to the tourism industry that we have now, where the people that are, normally they're men running these operations, and they just forget that women are actually very involved in the past and they're actually leaders. So there's a part where I realize sometimes it's not really intentional, sometimes it's just forgetting. But also there is in this part of the world, there is a connection to Islam and the gender roles, obviously. So to me, this is an interesting research for me as an entrepreneur because um, I am trying to figure out what is the role of women and also what my role is as an entrepreneur in this space. And the flip side, of course, is I learned quickly that men are very much dominant in this industry. This is the eagle hunting festival that happened in 2020. Obviously, you see a lot of men, and in 2020, when I was there, 60 adult males competed and they only had one female huntress. So this was a competition. Only one winner was chosen. And the winner was the one female huntress, Almudir. She was only 10 years old then, and she performed really well, was able to do all the tasks and won and became the champion for this eagle hunting competition for her community. So this phenomenon is happening more frequent now in the community. I think Pond, there was a documentary on eagle hunters that was a few years ago it was actually shown, and it was a big documentary about this female eagle huntress. Since then, there's been a number of them over time. And I think that at the time that I was there in 2020, they have about like 15 or a dozen of female eagle huntresses, all below the age of 18. So the fascinating thing about this aspect of the industry, because eagle hunting is also part of tourism by way of catering to tourists because they have the annual festival. So they are part of the tourism industry. But the fascinating thing that I love about this, the community is very supportive of the females being huntresses. And what I found out about the shift from being male dominated to being welcome to women was the fact that the reason why the community supports it because they found value in women partaking in it. And the value they found is the fact that they were able to preserve the eagle hunting culture more. The eagle hunting is a dying tradition, as you can imagine. So the community realized why should we stop the woman from joining if it actually preserves our culture. So one thing I realized is it's always about the value. If you want to shift an industry and if you want to change mindsets, you need to make an argument for the value that you're bringing when you create inclusion. So to me that was a very interesting learning for me as an entrepreneur. Now let me take you to Egypt. And this is a photo of the Bedouin tribes on the Sinai Trail, which is located on the Sinai Peninsula. The Sinai Trail is the first ever long distance trail of Egypt, and it's about 500 something kilometers. It takes 48 days to do. I trekked 24 days of the trail back in February. And these were the members of our trekking team. They were all men. We were led by three different tribes. We walked on three or four different regions of the Sinai Trail, and they were just all men leading the trip. And this trail actually started recently in 2015. It was launched. So it's a pretty young trail and a community-led project led by the Bedouins, which is an amazing thing because it's 100% community-led. So when I was on the ground, I tried to do some research. I found out the Sinai Trail is led by 8 Bedouin tribes, led all by men since the start of the program. Except in 2019, I met this woman when I was in Egypt. Her name is Yasser. She is one of the members of the Hamada tribe, and she's the very first female guide of the Sinai Trail. She started in 2019. So she pushed that boundary on her own. And the way she did it was to basically find allies who are open to the idea of having women guide on the trail. So, at first, who she talked to first is her husband. So she garnered some support from her husband. And then from there, it went towards the family members. And then from there, she had to connect with the leaders in her own tribe. So now they have about 4 to 5 women who are able to guide on this part of the trail. They're just with this Hamada tribe only. Out of the 8 tribes, it's only one tribe allowing the women. But having said that, it's still a big hurdle for them because there's still people who are opposed to the idea of women guiding in this part of the world. Even though women here, the Bedouin women, are known to take their goats and sheep to the mountains and herd. So they know the trails very well. They have the skills, they have the capacity. It's just a matter of gender roles and also the religion. In this part of the world, they're Muslim. So there's a lot of rules for them to follow. But I think it would be interesting to see how this pans out in the future. I think this is just the start for the women. It's very positive how it's going to look for them. I think it's gonna be a big inclusion for them one day. There's gonna be more women and more people who are gonna support. But at this time, there's still a major glass ceiling for them because a lot of people don't want them to do overnight treks. They want to restrict them to day hikes, which of course doesn't really make sense. It's better if they do multi-day treks in order to be part of the industry. So now that's how kind of like how it looks like with the adventure travel world that I navigate. And this is important for me to point out because, I look back at my mission and my mission is very clear. I wanted to create equity and inclusion for women and indigenous communities as well. But the question for me becomes, as an entrepreneur, how do I leverage my identity, my marginalized identity, in a space where majority holds the privilege and they don't want to include me or someone that looks like me? And to be honest, I don't have the 100% answer to this, but I will give you some of the, discoveries I've had on this journey. But before that, I do want to share with you about something about me, my background. This was me in the Philippines. I'm Filipina by birth. I was born there. I moved to America when I was 13. This was back in the 80s with my mom in Manila in our house. So obviously, first and foremost, I'm an immigrant to America. And when I first stepped a foot in America, it was very clear to me that my identity was going to come into play when it comes to my career. Obviously, we have our own set of experiences as an immigrant and also as a woman and also as a person of color when it comes to career and just our everyday lives. We have to deal with our identity. So I think dealing with marginalized identity isn't really something I would say new to me. It's been something I have to live with as a woman of color and an immigrant. You've been trained from the beginning to deal with it, but you could never become an expert, to be honest. I think it's just an evolving thing, but you learn lessons along the way. So being a lawyer for 15 years as a civil rights litigator in DC, I dealt with my marginalized identity. And it was very tough because there was not room for speaking up, to be honest, back in the day. Like, I mean, I quit my job like maybe 7 years, 6, 7 years ago now. And back then it was very difficult to speak up against, any kind of microaggression or whatnot. So that was my experience dealing with marginalized identity. I fell silent for the most part of my life in America. Now, I want to share a contrast with you. I fell in love with outdoors at the same time I was a lawyer. And this is the place where I found safety and being 100% myself. Whereas my job as a lawyer, it was so unsafe as a marginalized person. I felt so free being in the outdoors. And that's why I couldn't let it go. That's why I became an entrepreneur because this was what made me fall in love with the mountains. There's no judgment. It doesn't matter what color I am. It doesn't matter if I'm a male or a female. All of those things go away when you're in the outdoors. So that's the connection I have with the outdoors, just to kind of give you a sense of why I became a global mountain nomad from a lawyer, which is insane in some ways. So this is really about this now leads me to the idea of branding because when I first started out as an entrepreneur, when I did make that decision to leave my career in 2017, a lot of people, when I started my company or my entrepreneurship, asked me, well, what is your brand about? And trust me, I think this is one of the biggest questions you'll run into creating your business or your projects. And in all honesty, it's an existential question when I look back. It's really about who you are. And I think it's funny because before I became an entrepreneur, I have no business background. I always thought that if I start a business, I can just hide behind the business and it'll be like this company and it's disconnected from me. When I started shifting in 2017 with my career of becoming an entrepreneur, I quickly realized things have changed. People want to know who's behind the company. They're more interested in who founded it more than what tours do you offer. And to me that was like, wow, so this is going to be more personal now. It's more personal than I ever expected. I'm a very private person actually because I was a lawyer, a prosecutor. I don't indulge in sharing information on social media for that reason. But when became an entrepreneur, it was a whole different ball game. And so people are asking me and insisting, what is your brand? I'm like, what do you mean? What's my brand? My brand is trekking. It's like, no, that's not what I mean. Who are you? What are you about? What's unique about you? And at first, I couldn't really figure out the answer because it's like, how far do I go with explaining to you who I am? I just want to run a company, Um, but I don't want to have to indulge my personal life with anybody. But so I thought about that. I had to reflect on that because to me, that was all new. And I don't have any business background. I didn't take any classes on entrepreneurship. I just had this passion and I want to solve a problem. I wanted to create something like, I want to be included in the industry. That's really the problem I want to solve. It's for myself and for other people. And then that's when someone also advised me, an African American woman told me, who's an expert on business, told me an interesting advice. She said, if you're going to start this, you should not talk about race or identity politics. Stay neutral. Don't make it controversial because you will never make it. You'll never get customers if you offend them with any kind of political stuff. So to me, I got different advice, different types of, thoughts about, starting entrepreneurship. And I was kind of confused because it's like, on one hand, they want to know who I am. And then on the other, they're saying, don't talk about race, don't talk about who you are. And, and I'm like, this is fascinating. So I took time to introspect and understand what I want to be about and what the company should be about, and realize the first thing I have to ask myself really is, what value do I find when it comes to my identity, whether it's marginalized or not? And so I had to do some soul searching and try to figure out what is the how does that intersect with my mission, with my projects, with what I want to do. And that's really a question that I'm raising to you guys when you start your company or your enterprise. Is you may end up falling into this trap where you need to figure out what is the intersection between your identity and what you're doing. And so I did look into that and realized, you know what, I do have a value because I come from a different story angle. No one has really talked about how travel is like for a person like me, for example. The narratives come from a white gaze, from a male gaze. So if I tell you my story, it'll be the first time you're gonna hear it. And you know what? That's value, right? So for me, I found that value in me. And when I found that out, I realized if I do this and I want to share with the world this value or my identity, I have to commit to it 100%. Because if I have ask this and sort of just do it sort of like one foot out and then one foot in, it's not going to be authentic. People are going to see that. And people are going to see that I'm just sort of like strategizing, but not really showing the world who I am and what my brand is. And also, I didn't want to do that anymore because when I was a lawyer, I felt silent all the time when it comes to being authentic. And I promised myself, if I'm going to be an entrepreneur, I want to be me and I don't want to, decode myself anymore. I don't want to whitewash myself. So I want to fit in. I don't want to think about the dominant culture and feel like I have to cater them and decode myself so that they don't feel uncomfortable. They don't feel, uncomfortable. So I dropped all of that nonsense and realized, you know what? I find value in this. I'm going to go for it and commit. Having said that, I do want to warn you that it's also best when you take steps or decide on these kinds of things in your business or enterprise that you also study the industry and the landscape and assess the risk. Because every entrepreneur, no matter what you do, every decision you make, you are always going to assess risk, right? That's part of the game. You always have to figure out the pros and the cons, the advantages and disadvantages. And what I mean by that is, for me, when it comes to marginalized identities, I had to ask myself, is the space and the industry safe enough for me to do this? Because I know when I was a lawyer, it wasn't. If I did that, I could have gotten fired in some kind of way, right? Or I could have been demoted. I would never get the promotion. That's the space I used to navigate. So I knew very well that if I leverage my marginalized identity, I have to be careful because there are risks. So what I did was do some research. And the question I had to ask myself is this: what is the status of diversity, equity, inclusion in the adventure travel industry? And the adventure travel industry is the space I navigate. So I specifically looked at that. Lo and behold, I was really delighted to find out that the statistics look great. In the past few years, there were studies done by major associations, and it's showing that there's a lot of investment being made by travelers of color. It's 51 billion annually. For example, I think this was a statistics from that 2019 or 2020. And the breakdown, you can see, is 19 billion from Black American travelers, 16 billion from Hispanic travelers, 13 billion from Asian Americans, and then 2 billion other non-white American travelers. And then in addition, I also found out there are 22 million outbound adventure travelers of color in the US, age 18 and up yearly that are traveling. And the breakdown you can see is pretty significant. So seeing this made me feel reassured that, oh, there's a shift in the culture in this industry. I think that this is good news because most likely the products that I'm going to sell will be bought by people who are travelers of color because they understand that they're supporting my enterprise and they understand the idea of inclusion and equity. So these are actually my target market. So basically I'm studying the market in a lot of ways, right? So within this industry. And I was really happy to see that the statistics favor the idea of the branding that I'm trying to you know to execute. And then I also look at the media. Like the media is very telling in the travel and outdoor industries because there's a lot of content on outdoor adventures and travel. And over the past few years, there's just a huge amount of increase in terms of visibility for Black, Indigenous, people of color, outdoor adventurers. And if you just Google hikers or you know bikers, whatever sport or in the outdoors, you'll see a lot of change in terms of the visibility. And in fact, there's a lot of affinity groups now on social media. You can find Latino outdoors, outdoor Afro, Indigenous women hikers. There's so many affinity groups supporting each other now. And that's part of the reason why there's an increase in visibilities because of the social media and the affinity groups. And this one, I just want to share. This is the photo of this Full Circle Everest expedition team. If you didn't know, they're currently in Everest right now, trying to summit currently at this time, and they're the first all Black team climbing Everest. And I found out also they're sponsored by North Face and other major outdoor brands. And plus, they're all over the news. CNN covered them, National Geographic covered them. So to me, this is a sign of an industry that is supporting diversity and inclusion. So again, this is another sort of assessing the market strategy for me to figure out, should I leverage the identity that I have? Is it safe enough? And looking at this, it was very encouraging that, that I'm on the right path in terms of my decision. I also look at the statistics on women in travel because women they're actually they're actually part of the market that I cater to. And so I wanted to know, how far are they in terms of presence in the travel industry? And it turns out it's a pretty good statistics as well. Over the past few years, there's been major increases in terms of presence and involvement in the industry. In fact, as you can see here, there is now an increase of female solo travel too. And there are statistics showing that even women are outnumbering men when it comes to solo travel. So that's good news. That means women are partaking in the industry. They're consumers, they're buying, and they're going to support the mission that I have. So I'm just showing you some of the statistics. There's so many statistics on female travel. You can look it up on Google, and it's just like all over the place. And I think it's just really, I think the travel and outdoor industry are all in agreement that the women are the future of tourism, to be honest, at all levels: consumers, leaders, entrepreneurship, guides, porters, everything. But we still have barriers, unfortunately. The glass ceiling is still there. So this is very encouraging in terms of the movement in the industry that I navigate, as you can see. And obviously, because women are partaking, it's a huge amount of money that they're putting in, 15 trillion in spending power, and also up to 125 billion in 2020. In general, these are the shifts that I found in the industry. Travel companies are explicitly expressing their commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion in the industry. When you go on their website, they talk about it now. If I started my company 15 years ago, I think I would not have seen even one single company doing this at all. I think it was a different culture then. It would have been very difficult to talk to companies about DEI because the DEI is in a way a recent phenomenon. Affinity groups have increased, as like I said, in both travel and outdoor spaces. Industry-wide discussions as a result on DEI have increased because we're partaking in it now. BIPOC communities are part of the DEI conversations. I've attended so many sessions on DEI. To me, it's really encouraging because I'm seeing the mind shift on diversity and inclusion. And of course, there's an increase on DEI resources, which of course helps because educating people on DEI is probably one of the most critical tools that we need to diversify the outdoor and travel industries. Having said all that, now you move into the idea of margin, like leveraging the marginalized identity. How does that look like if you do include that in your brand? I think the biggest thing that I've seen with people who are leveraging their marginalized identities, there's so many like entrepreneurs that are doing this now. They are telling their stories. We're all telling our stories and live experiences in an authentic manner. We now have the microphone and the access. We're able to write, we're able to speak about it, all of that without any kind of filter, which is great to see. By the byproduct of this, of course, is you connect with other marginalized individuals or groups that are doing the same thing that you are. You all are advocates and you rally together and support each other. The other thing that comes out of it is you also empower and create access for those folks who are marginalized that are still a bit afraid to speak up. And one thing that comes up in my head as an example is when I work with the indigenous communities in Peru or Mongolia, because they don't know how to access the mainstream tourism industry, and I know how to do it, I'm able to share that access with them and take them with me on the journey to create that inclusion for them. And of course, you forge allyships with marginalized group or otherwise. And the otherwise part is really interesting because now we're seeing a lot of major products and companies joining in on DEI, and they're asking you to be an ambassador. They're paying you to do certain things. They're paying you to be a consultant on DEI. And these are male dominated or white dominated companies. So the allyship is expanding beyond just marginalized groups. And I'm hoping this just continues on in the future. And of course, my favorite, you decolonize narratives. When you start including everyone's voices, you change all of the things that are wrong with the narratives that we have in travel and outdoor industries and make it whole and make it honest and real. And authenticity becomes the name of the game in the industry. It becomes all about telling your truth, being who you are, and just everyone respecting and supporting that. And eventually you become an instrument of social change along with all the other people that are doing it, and you become a collective instrument of social change. Now, the thing is, there is also a tough aspect to this, and I want you guys to be cautious what it means to do this work. Emotional labor is a big thing and it's real. There've been times when I felt so exhausted having to leverage my marginalized identity that I had to take a break, especially when the Asian hate happened last year. People were knocking on my door. I don't even have to knock on people's door. They want me to write an article. They want my opinion on things. They want me to talk about it. And it's great because people want to hear our stories, but then again, it's also a lot of emotional labor because it re-traumatizes you too. And that's one thing I learned about it. So be careful about that. It's okay to take breaks because you need it. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. You're just going to, eventually emotionally fall apart if you don't take care of yourself. There's also tokenism that happens, and it still happens a lot, and also being taken advantage of by certain companies. And what I mean by that is sometimes their DI effort isn't as authentic and real. So be cautious of where they're coming from when they collaborate with you. Are they aligned with your approach with DEI? My approach with DEI is very kind of hardcore human rights, because I'm a human rights lawyer. So I'm not in the marketing situation. I'm not a marketing kind of person. So my focus is always very critical of companies, like asking them, are you doing this for the right reason? And are you incorporating human rights aspect to it, not just a marketing scheme? So pick and choose who you work with because it does matter. You have a brand. And so if you are coming from a human rights angle, you want to work with someone who really, really supports that instead of someone who's like checking a box, right? And then the dissenters, you're gonna find them all over, especially on social media. You post something about race or you say something about gender and they're going to be all over you. So be cautious of that world because it also can drag you down, and just be comfortable with the fact that authenticity comes with a price, and you can't please everybody as an entrepreneur. In fact, at first I was so nervous about losing a lot of customers because I talked so much about identity. But now I'm like, you know what? It's okay. you do attract the right ones. And when you do, it's amazing because you don't have to pretend and you don't have to do any kind of adjustments to who you are. You just, they basically follow you along with your journey. And that's an amazing thing to have as an entrepreneur. So how has leveraging my marginalized identities advanced my mission? I think, of course, you got to assess the outcome. And in the past 5 years that I've been running my enterprise, I want to give you an example. But before talking about this, I do want to say that the leveraging of identity has helped me a lot as a journalist and a writer, because right now, because the culture is so interested in the topic, I feel like, you know how I said there's value in the identity that I have? I really saw that happen in the past few years because everyone now wants to know, what is your viewpoint on travel as a person of color? What is your viewpoint as a woman? What do you know about the indigenous community in Peru? Can you talk about us? So to me, it's evidence of the fact that the culture has shifted so much that it is for the benefit of people like me to really speak our truths and to be authentic. And this one is a tourism project that I co-founded in Western Mongolia, Kusvegi English and Nomadic Culture Camp. It's working with the Eagle Hunters community, and we actually focus on language equity and preservation of culture in this project. It's a 30-day slow tourism where only 8 people are recruited every summer to come to the community and live with them and teach English to the young nomads. This is a very purposeful project, very deliberate in terms of what we're doing. That we want to maintain it at a very small number of people because we want to decolonize the industry. We don't want it to be an extractive tourism. And when you're part of the program, you're basically going to create language equity for the kids so that they can access opportunities outside Mongolia or even in Mongolia to have careers where English can actually advance your career. I know that for a fact because I was an immigrant and I became a lawyer because of English. So I know how far you can go with language equity. But at the same time, I needed to be mindful of the preservation of culture and identity, which I struggled as a Filipina and an immigrant. So I think this is such a prime example how I leverage my experiences as a Filipina American and basically make sure that when I design this project with the community, that we're not going to compromise their identity over language, right? And this is a very delicate balance. I'm still trying to figure this out, but thankfully I understand that concept very well because of my background as Filipina moving to America and losing my identity along the way, to be honest. And that's one thing I don't want, the legal hunters to lose. Um, and we were so delighted because we actually won the competition in 2021 because of this project and the authenticity of our project, and the how unique it is. And so we were really happy that the industry is supporting our insane idea of 30 days with 8 participants and being very careful about language equity and culture preservation in the way we're running things. So we were very happy that the culture is supporting all our ideas with this project. And I'm very proud to say that the project was led by 4 women, women of color, 3 from the eagle hunting community, which to me harnessed the power of women leadership with the 4 of us sharing that role. I thought it was just amazing to see that because the female leadership is completely different from what I've seen when it comes to male. And I think there is there's amazing benefit when women step up to the plate because the community is fully served when women, take leadership of a project. Um, and so, yeah, I think the one last thing I just want to address is the why. Uh, as an entrepreneur, you're always going to have whys, and you have to figure that out for yourself, like I did. When I started this idea of, leveraging the marginalized identity that I have, I knew for a fact that I wanted to just be authentic. And to me, I wanted to be 100% me. I didn't want to negotiate that anymore, even on my personal or professional life, because I experienced that being in America for the most part of my life. And then the second thing is by being authentic, I'm hoping I could just leave a lasting impact on future generations of entrepreneurs, people who want to venture into this industry that used to be very closed and excluding of people like me. I want to make it easier for them. I want to make it safer. I don't want them to go through the things that I went through. So to me, that's my hope that maybe future brown girl trekkers will come into the picture and it would be much easier for them to create and solve problems that they want to solve. And with that, I think the only thing I want to leave you guys with is the biggest learning out of all is that being a woman of color and an immigrant, they were not marginalized identities at all. To me, I realized they're superpowers, at least in this generation that we're in, right? And I guess I'm really happily just saying that because from this is really from my experience that if I didn't like go for this idea of being me, I would have regretted it because when you become you and you just stay true to yourself, that's really your edge and that's what makes you unique, and people want that. People actually seek that, and eventually in the end, I'm not even knocking on people's doors. They knock on my door because they're looking for something that I have, and I guess they see value in it. And I call that my superpower. And once you figure that out, anything is possible. You're perfectly capable of creating the world that you wish to be a part of. And, whether that's in the mountains like me and being with the women and creating inclusion alongside them or working with indigenous communities, it can all happen. But you just have to be authentic and real with your mission. So I think that's it, guys. Hopefully that's helpful for all of you. Thanks for having me.
Let me be the first one to say thank you, Marinelle, for sharing your story with us and for your authenticity. Your authenticity is inspiring, and what an amazing message to send our community and our students. And it is so germane to social entrepreneurship. It's hard to practice it without being authentic, and you've certainly shared that experience and that message with us. So just a huge round of applause. We're all on mute, but for you and for your story, thank you so much. Now I'm going to stop talking and let's get some questions. And either you can unmute yourself and ask, or you can pop it into the chat because what you've shared with us speaks to so many of our ventures here. Thank you, Marinelle. So who's up for a question? Marina, if you wanted to say anything. All right.
Looks like
Okay,
Chantal
yes.
has a question.
Chantal. Who's on mute? And feel free to type them into. Oh, there you go.
Chantal is still on mute.
Still on mute. Sorry, Chantal.
Oh, no. Weird. Okay, well, maybe I can get a question started while Chantal figures out the unmuting. Oh, you cannot unmute yourself. Okay, did I change the settings? Is that my fault?
So
I'm
let
sorry.
me turn off.
Yeah. Oh, here we go. Okay, I think now that should do it.
Sorry,
that was my fault. I apologize.
I was like, I can't. Yeah, no, thank you so much, Marino, for this talk. It was super helpful and very inspiring. But I want to ask you, I mean, in terms of myself, I would identify definitely with as being a woman, and that also like marginalizes you in definitely a lot of circumstances. But I also, I work in Uganda with refugees there, and I feel like as someone from rather the other side, like the more privileged side and being white and not of color, I come from this place of privilege. So how would you, what would your advice be for me, like to be aware of those marginalized identities, like how to make sure that they're well enough represented in my venture, that people are heard enough, and that they feel comfortable being their marginalized identity and leveraging it for the better?
Yeah, that's a good question because that's happening a lot now. Not everyone have the same level of marginalization. So even for myself, for example, the Quechua community, I'll talk about the Porters. I spent a lot of time with them, but I'm still deemed as an outsider and a privileged person, right? Because I'm from the US, even though I kind of look like them, and they kind of get perplexed by that because it's like, you're kind of like us, but you're not. So I think what I learned about this is that even if you don't have the same similarity of level of marginalization, that's when research and building relationships come in. So what I mean by that is when I realized the difference between me and the porters being Quechua, I needed to be in their community to get to know them. If they invite me to come, I come, but I don't always go there with sort of a script. I don't go there with an agenda. People, you know what the Quechua people have. One Quechua friend of mine said to me, you know how you gain their trust? You just sit there and eat, share a meal, and feel emotions. Um, and I think at first I was kind of confused by that because I'm a lawyer and I'm very logical. I'm like, what does that mean? Can I just ask questions? Because that's what I do when I'm trying to get to know people and get facts. And so I backed off a lot more as an outsider. I stopped asking too many questions, and I just sat there and spent time with them. If they want to talk about potatoes, we talk about potatoes, right? And if we talk about, farming, we talk about that, or the weaving, right? So I think the biggest thing that you can do, to be honest, is build that trust, right? Because you will not. There's nothing you can do about your other identities, right? There's no way you can be more marginalized than you are, to their level. And then also, when you have trust, they're going to open up to you with their truths. They're going to tell you the honest truths about their lives. And then that's how you can authentically represent them. Because once they have trust in you, they're going to share with you what they really feel and think about what's going on. So if you're advocating for some folks in Uganda, you got to understand what their issues are, their dreams, their desires, but the only way you can get that is to gain that trust, to feel like you're part of the community. I can't think of any other way, to be honest, like the best way. You can do some research academically about the group or the people there, but honestly, I think that's still kind of a colonized way of doing it, right? A lot of writers and academics. I mean, no offense, I know you guys, some of you guys are into academics or maybe having PhD stuff going on, but I think that's I've been also asked to do PhD, but I was like kind of reluctant because I feel like when you do that kind of research, you turn the people into subjects, that you dehumanize them in some kind of way. That's why I don't recommend just doing research on academic stuff or any kind of content that you find online or whatnot. I think you have to spend time with them as much as you can, right? So that would be my best answer.
Thank you so much. It was super helpful.
That's an amazing answer. Listening, the power of listening. Thank
Yes.
you, Marinelle. Amazing. Andreas, you're up.
Thank you, Marinel, for being able to speak with us. I'm really interested in the aspect of storytelling that you were mentioning, and specifically, what in regards to my venture, I'm working with specialty coffee based in Colombia, South America, and where I'm looking more and more into the aspect of how to tell a story and how to communicate a story, especially when we work with people who are refugees and their families and things of that nature. So I'm interested in hearing like what specific avenues best work for you when trying to communicate a story of uh, like leveraging a marginalized identity. Like, were there any specific avenues that helped you communicate a story, or were there any specific strategies that you use when trying to communicate a story for other people that might not like be connected to your identity?
Yes. I mean, again, I think the listening comes in here because you want to know. I think the way I approach storytelling is still like a lawyer. I don't own the story ever. I feel like when I think our stories are probably like more expensive than any money can buy, to be honest, because once it's out there, you can't get it back, right? Once it's out there, people are gonna know who you are in a certain kind of way. So we have to really be careful in terms of storytelling. We have to be mindful of how we present the people that we're going to be talking about in our story. So, how I do that is, again, if you can spend time with them, introduce yourself, and sort of just get to know what the community is about. And actually, it doesn't hurt to not bring a script. Because a lot of writers, I have to say, sadly, the travel writers still are very quick in terms of their approach to this. They just basically have a questions in mind and a storyline, and they go there and they extract, right? It's like filling in the blanks. Please don't do that. Go there with a blank piece of paper and just sort of understand, oh, what are they willing to share about their culture or community? And then it's okay to ask them, so what story do you want to tell the world? Because one thing I notice about storytellers and writers, they never even ask the people what story they want to share. They go there and then post the story, and they're going to tell them, you know what, I'm going to write about this. Okay, so give me the answer to this question. I think that's a very colonized approach. Yet again, right? Outsiders going in, let me do my job and get paid for it, because travel writers get paid for as freelance writers, right? So they treat it like a job. And I think when it comes to, if you especially if you have a project with them, make sure that you give them the microphone and the control of the story. Ask them, what do they want to tell, what do they want to share, and make sure they have ownership of it, right? And in fact, in my work, what I also do at times, it's either I feature some people in the community, so we can elevate their voices. And what I'm trying to do now also is, if I identify someone in the community who wants to do writing, I co-write with them as well. So if there is a story and they're able to really co-write the story with me, I gave them that access to be a co-writer. So then it's not just me writing about it, it's someone else in the community who is also telling the story. Because, to be honest, I feel weird going to the Bedouin community in Egypt and writing about them. In fact, who is the best person to write about the Bedouins? Someone from their community. But the problem is language equity, right? That's why language equity is key. The English isn't, it's not fluent enough for some of the publications. So they're going to struggle in terms of writing that story. But if you can identify someone in the community who want to write, who want to share the story and be a co-writer, that's also a nice approach as an outsider.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Andreas, amazing question. Marinel, amazing answer. There's like 6 questions in every one of these questions and 10 answers in every one of these answers. Thank you so much for that. We're closing in. We have 2.5 minutes left before 5. Do we have a last question? I'll give 10 seconds for a last question to pop up before I ask Marinel to give us a piece of parting advice. So any last questions? I have one. I want to quit my job and do what you do.
Sure, join me. You could be my
Are you
neighbor in the
hiring?
mountains. Oh, well, I haven't gotten that far yet.
So Marinel, what one piece of advice, not to put you on the spot, but I'll put you on the spot, do you have for all of our new entrepreneurs who are trying to do exactly the right thing at the right time and listen and tell stories? What piece of parting advice do you have for us?
Okay, so if you're trying to solve a problem as an entrepreneur, I have maybe a good or bad news. I don't know. It depends on how you see it. The answers will not come readily. So, in fact, I think it requires a lot of patience and a lot of detours. It's not from point A to B. It's not straightforward. So I want you guys to realize that, because along the way you might get disappointed and discouraged. And I'm gonna be honest, there were moments where, like, what the heck am I doing? I had a salary paid position. I could have been a judge. That would have been a simple concept to live with. And now I'm like all over the place, right? Literally all over the place, physically. That part I like, but mentally it's another story. So it's a mental, it's a circus in my mind. There's so many things that you have to go through mentally, and the answers in the end, you're just seeking answers, right? Because you're really trying to solve a problem. You're trying to figure out how to create this. In my world, I want to create equity and inclusion, but it's not straightforward. So sometimes the best way is to write a story. Sometimes it's actually to design a tour project, right? Sometimes you don't even know what to do, and then you sit there and meditate and see if an answer comes up, right? So I tell this because I don't want you to feel discouraged. I don't want you to have high expectations. But even if it is difficult in that sense, it's all worth it, because you grow. I mean, I'm growing every day. I haven't gotten this much growth in my life in my lawyering, I became stagnant, but now I feel like I'm in my 20s again, and I'm like just learning so much. And that's the beauty of entrepreneurship. No matter where you go, there is always a success and some kind of an impact, whether it's on your life or on others, if you're lucky. So that's my parting advice.
Amazing. Thank you so very much. Yes, rounds of applause from everybody, even though we're muted. Thank you, Marinelle, for
Thank you so
sharing.
much.
Thank you. Thank you, Marina.
Thank you so much. All of this information was just so incredibly valuable. I know our students are just starting out on their entrepreneurship journeys, their social impact journeys. So hearing this from someone like yourself is very empowering and just so important.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of you who joined us at 4 o'clock and asked great questions and listened to Marinelle's amazing and authentic story. Marinelle, thank you so much again. Be safe in Peru. Have a lot of fun, and you'll hear from us very soon because we'd love for you to share your story with our students as much and as often as you're willing to do. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. Take
Awesome.
care, guys.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Have a great day.
Bye, everybody.